In this video, I'm going to be sharing my findings from testing affordable vinyl records care products, and I'm going to be comparing them to their more expensive counterparts. And why am I doing that? Well, this is a great example. The Milty Zero Stat 3 anti-static gun is a product that's been around for decades. It's absolutely legendary, and I feel like most vinyl enthusiasts has probably owned one or owns one now. And if you're new to vinyl playback, you might be considering one because of its great price. This legendary product you can buy for around £70 depending on where you shop. So it's a great price for a legendary product. But all of those people might be thinking, well, this has been around for decades. Has technology moved on? Is there a better product available? And that's where the Furatech Destat 3 really comes in, because this is a much more expensive product at around £400. So that's a hell of a lot more money than £70. And I think, for it to be justified at that high price, it needs to offer something different. It needs to offer something more over the Milty Zero Stat. So does it? That's what I've been comparing, and I think you're going to find this comparison really fascinating. But I don't want to start the video there. I want to start by looking at the cartridge, or really stylus cleaning, because this is something I admittedly had overlooked the importance of. Now, don't get me wrong, I had invested in 3 in the end of these Project Clean It stylus cleaning brushes, 3 of them. And I think these cost around £10 each, depending on where you buy them from. So it's a really, affordable, great solution for cleaning your stylus. But one of you guys recommended this to me, which is the Flux HiFi Sonic Cleaner, which is more of a wet, ultrasonic type of stylus cleaning brush, but it costs £150. You can actually buy it less if you buy it in black, but we'll just say £150. That's what I paid for this Ferrari Red edition. So that's 15 times more expensive than the brush. So, is it worth it? Is that cost difference justified by a better cleaning performance? I think you'll find this fascinating. But firstly, why do we even need to clean the stylus? Well, we have all had this situation, I'm sure, where we listen to a record and get a collection of dust build up on the stylus that we clearly don't want to be there. But this is not showing us the full picture. Our eyes are not good enough. And it's for this reason I have been getting into macro and magnified video, so we can all see some pretty shocking things in glorious video quality, such as the sheer amount of dust that was on this Sumiko styling cartridge that I have been using. So I did what I always do. I cleaned the stylus with the Project brush, and I took extra time and extra care to do the cleaning job as best I could by eye. And here is the stylus now under macro vision. You can see that after brushing, more of the diamond micro ridge tip on the stylus is visible. I know that is helped by me putting a white background behind the stylus. I didn't think to do that before, but I think we can see a cleaner tip and also a cleaner cantilever. But it's not a massive difference, but I thought maybe this is as clean as we can get it. Except that is clearly not the case at all, because this is how the stylus looked after it had been cleaned by the Flux HiFi machine. The difference between these two is massive. What before looked like a big patch of solder or similar around the diamond tip was actually just a massive build-up of dust or debris. And when I saw this happen, as I was looking, at my monitor that I use to monitor what I'm doing with the camera, I couldn't actually believe the difference. So whoever among you recommended this little wonder cleaner to me, I have to say thank you. The Flux HiFi Sonic Cleaner comes in nice packaging. And like I said, I paid £150 for it from Amazon because I bought the Ferrari Red colour as a present to myself, so why not? In the box is everything you need to get cleaning, the machine, the fluid, and 2 AAA batteries, which install underneath. And it's super simple to use. There is a little pad that you put a drop of the included liquid on, and the liquid seems to sit on top of the pad. And there is something interesting about that, as you will see. You place your stylus down onto the pad and into the liquid essentially, press the button on the machine, it lights up and starts to gently pulse, and 10 seconds later, you're done. And by eye, you can't really see anything happening, but with the power of macro vision, you can see the liquid moving for the cleaning process. After the first clean, I could see an obvious improvement, but I could still see some dust, which could have been maybe just a couple of loose fibers that came off the cleaning pad from the machine itself, with it being brand new, I don't know. But I also realised if I was clever, I could position nearly all of the cantilever in the liquid and remove the dust off of all of it, not just the tip. So that is what I tested next. And in this video, it looks like there is a lot of liquid there, doesn't it? But that was just 2 or 3 drops, which is a tiny amount. And you have already seen the result of this cleaning, an almost brand new looking cantilever and stylus. And the difference from where we started now is pretty enormous. So I think you can see there the difference is massive between the cleaning solutions. And you could easily say that, the £150 cleaner justifies that difference in performance quality. I think that's easy to say. I think that's fair to say. But I wasn't convinced yet. I wanted to test something else. And another one of you guys recommended this to me, which is like a Stylus cleaning goo or putty that you dip the tip down into. And there's loads of these available from all sorts of manufacturers. This one is from Cleargroove. Again, this was recommended to me. It's just a sticky putty, really. So I wanted to test this to compare because this is, again, much, much more affordable. So I played a few records that were clean, but not perfectly so, to muck up the stylus as much as I could. And it looked like this, so mucked up enough, I think, for this test. And what I found interesting about this was that it only took a few plays of modestly clean records to get the stylus from new condition to this. So there is a lesson in that, I feel. And then I dipped it into the pot of Stylus Cleaner Putty, as you can see. And because I had the luxury of macro vision, I moved the dip spot about to try and make sure I gave this cleaning method the best chance of success. And then I looked at the result, and again, you can clearly see this method works and cleans muck off of your stylus tip. But does it work better than the Flux Sonic Cleaner? Well, here are the two side by side. For me, it's pretty close, with it being, I think, quite difficult to see a huge difference. Taking into account, it was impossible for me to match the camera framing as I was doing all the video work. But for me, the big difference with the Flux is that you can clean the whole cantilever as well as really high quality cleaning the tip, rather than the dip just cleans the tip. But when we're comparing the cost, £150 here, I think I paid about £20 for this dip. So the delta is absolutely massive. And like I said, there's loads of varieties of this. I've seen, I think the most expensive one I've seen is from DS Audio. Comes in a lovely container, much easier to use than this. And I think that costs around £75. So that's about as expensive as our putty, a dip is going to get. So this is still twice the price of that. But I feel like when it comes to value, people often put the price associated to value. Value is not how much something costs, it's how much you're going to use it over a period of time and how effective it is across that period of time. So if I think about using both of these solutions for maybe 10 years, I feel like this is going to give me a cleaner cantilever and stylus tip for 10 years. So yes, it costs more, but the cost of this spread over 10 years using it regularly, I think the value here is it's pretty easy to justify. This is a really cracking machine. I'm so glad I found this. And I have to say, after using this and a few other things that you'll see in this video, this has definitely given me the cleanest sounding and also the clearest sounding vinyl playback I've had from vinyl in this room and this system since I started. And by clearer, I mean the soundstage. That really has been the big difference I've noticed from using this machine. Now, of course, that could just be placebo because I saw with my eyes, the macro vision, I saw what this was doing, but I'm just saying it as I have heard it. So the second product comparison I've been doing is with the famous, legendary Milty Destat 3, in this instance, anti-static gun, and the Furatech Destat 3. because in my last video I showed and really proved that this, yes, it's expensive at around £400, but the Furatech Destat 3 is nearly 100% effective. And if you haven't seen that video, I'd strongly recommend you go and watch it, because this is, proves itself to be expensive but exceptionally good. Like, it's nearly perfect, almost perfect, and there's nothing perfect in this world, but this very much nearly is. But it was you guys in the comments section of that video that recommended the Milty to me and asked me if I'd done any comparisons between the two. And I hadn't, because I already owned the Destat 3. So getting the Xerostat 3 and testing it has been really interesting. And I wanted to test it in lots of different ways. I wanted to test, the usage methods, lots of different ways. I'd read all manner of different recommendations across forums for how to use it. So I wanted to just, test everything to see if I could get the Xerostat 3 to match the performance of the Destat 3 for, a fifth of the price. I knew an ideal test would be on brand new records, as I have seen they have extremely high static charge straight out of the packaging. And as you can see, even with a very high quality expensive record that's been stored in a high quality anti-static sleeve, the record I have here has a very high static charge of between 4 and 8 kilovolts. And this is something to think about if you play brand new records straight from the sleeve, because this is not an isolated situation. Every single brand new record I've tested has a very high static charge straight out of the sleeve. For those of you who might not have seen my previous video where I did loads of static testing, this is a tester, electrostatic tester that I purchased to do it. I paid £330-ish for it from Amazon. So it's quite an expensive machine. You can get it cheaper elsewhere. But what's been really great about this is it seems to be very accurate, but more importantly, it's consistent. And if you'd like to, find out any more information about this tester, I'll leave a link to the details for it down below in the comments section. I decided to test the Milty initially by using it as someone might do had they not read the instructions or seen any videos. So just by pressing the trigger a couple of times, aiming the Milty at different areas of the record. I then tested the static, and you can see a noticeable drop from the 4 to 8 kilovolts that we saw before, down to between 0.5 and 1.5 kilovolts, which is an impressive reduction, of course, but not perfect. I then repeated the action and tested again, and the result was improved, with the record now having a static charge of around 0.6 to 1 kilovolts across different areas of the record. But then I used the Furatech Destat and tested after, and you can see, no surprise, it completely killed the static on the record or thereabouts. So that was important to set the standard here. I needed another new record, which I had, and you can see the static from new is crazy high again. No surprise at all, it's the same for every record I've tried. But this time I tested the Milty using it in a similar fashion to how I used the Destat, by moving it around the record, and I was pressing and depressing the trigger. And after a couple of rotations, I tested for static, and I saw really great low numbers, which seemed great to me at the time. However, after checking the footage, you can see, yes, the numbers are very low, but some of the record is in negative charge and some positive charge. But overall, this seems to be a great usage method for the Milty, even though it's not the advised usage method. But I felt this needed more testing, and we will come back to it. I got another brand new record, this time from MoFi, which was not the cleanest out of the packaging, really quite disappointing given what's charged for these. However, looking at the brand new record static, we can see again it's very high, despite it having been stored in an expensive MoFi sleeve. This time I tested the Milty using the suggested method in the video on the Gold Ring website of holding the Milty within 12 inches of the record aimed at the centre, and then pressing and depressing the trigger as slowly as possible. I did this the 4 times as suggested and tested the static, and you can see it's a massive reduction from around 10 kilovolts to an approximate 0.6 to 1 kilovolts as I moved the tester around the record. So it's a big reduction again, but not a perfect one, or definitely not as effective as we've seen from the Destat. So I tested the Milty again using the same method to see if a second application or more presses and depresses could improve the result. And surprisingly, it didn't. The static level stayed pretty much the same. So it seemed like the effectiveness of this Milty usage method has a limit to its static reduction, especially compared to using the Destat method of rotating the gun around the record, which seems to give us a better result. And to make sure this was correct, I tested another brand new record in the same way, with the Milty gun pointing at the center of the record, pressing and depressing the trigger as slowly as I could to see if my trigger technique was affecting the result. But the testing showed a similar result. So I concluded at this point, yes, that the trigger action is of course important, and it's really quite difficult to do it slowly and slowly without it clicking. It really takes quite a long time, but that's obviously important. But either way, using this method, pointing it at the center of the record, could only ever give me, a similar type of static reduction, which was still impressive. It's still a massive reduction, but it's not as perfect or nearly as perfect as what I've seen from the Furatech Destat 3. But I wasn't finished yet. I got another brand new record and tested it and saw the same high static numbers we are used to by now. I then retested the Milty using the Furatech method of circling the record as I pressed and depressed the trigger to see if that really was the best method. And again, the static numbers are lower. And I thought I'd found the best method here. But reviewing the footage, you can see, yes, the static numbers are really very low. But some of the record is positively charged and some is negatively charged. And I really don't know, how bad that is or how important that is. And it kind of makes sense why that's happening, because as you press the trigger down, the Milty pushes positive ions out, and as you release it, it pushes negative ions. So it charges and then discharges the product. That's how it works. But I suppose as you're rotating that round the record, you'd have to get like a perfect coverage of both in order to get a perfect result, which I'm guessing is what the Furatech Destat does automatically. It's doing like a positive and a negative charge, maybe really quickly, or just by, circling it enough times within, that time frame. Like you press the button, fan comes on, I think it's like 20 seconds or something. That's clearly enough rotations to get a perfect, near perfect result. So you can hear it. So that's not very long, is it? And that's much, much quicker than trying to press that down really slowly 4 times. Imagine doing that 4 times. That takes much, much longer than this. And the result's not as effective as this. So, like I said, it's fascinating, important, and interesting testing. But so far, this is all just theory and me hand-holding a record. Is any of it still relevant when the record is placed on a turntable and playing? So I wanted to test this extensively. I used the Destat to kill the static on a record, to put it on a 0 static plane to start with. I then played both sides of that record, testing the static every so often to see how much static is built up from playing a record, something that we can't do anything about. And I was expecting the static build-up to be extremely high. But as you can see, yes, it's definitely more than the 0 where we started, but it's not gone up to a crazy level, even after a full side of playing. But when I pick the record up, you can see the static goes up a lot. But when I put the record down again on the turntable, the static reduces a lot. And I have to put this down to the design quality and earthing of the Origin Live turntable setup that I'm using here. It seems very impressive in this regard, as you will see. Because even after 2 sides of playing, the static has been very well managed by the turntable, it seems, with the amount recorded being as low as when hand holding after having used the Milty gun with the recommended point it at the middle technique. Just think about that for a second. But I wanted to test this more by using a record that had a higher starting static charge to see if the record starts with a higher static, does that generate more, does more build up? Is there a correlation between those numbers and that effect? So I placed a record on the turntable straight from a sleeve without using either the Destat or the Milty first. And you can see we have a much higher static starting point of around 2 kilovolts, ideal. But super interestingly, after I placed the HexMat molecular on the platter and switched the drive to 33 RPM and tested again, the static had halved. And I don't know the cause of this, but it was really interesting to see it. And I definitely wasn't expecting it. But either way, there is still more than double the static here than the previous test where I had completely removed it But amazingly, after 2 sides of playing, the static seemingly was, I'm going to call it, managed down to around the same level as the previous test, which again I was very surprised by and definitely was not expecting to see at all. So I started to think this all must be down to a really excellent design of turntable really and tone arm, I suppose, from the Origin Live Calypso and Conqueror that you can see there behind me. And that makes sense to me because this has been the quietest, like that background record vinyl, high gain vinyl noise that we get from listening to records. This has definitely been the quietest turntable I've had in here in that regard so far. So, you can see some correlation between certain things when you scratch beneath the surface and start testing them. So while this was all impressive, I was still very conscious that static reading was not 0. There's still static there, which is not ideal. So I thought maybe I can use, the Milty Zero Stack gun to improve that situation, to, use its power to take that static down to 0. And this test could really shock some of you. So with the record spinning, you can see the tester shows a static charge of around 0.6 kilovolts. I then took the Milty and followed the suggested method of slow presses and releases aiming at the center of the record. And amazingly, you can see in real time the static getting worse and worse with every press. So if you're using the Milty like this, I suggest you stop now, as you're making the static situation worse, not better. So I can imagine some people might have been doing that for 40 years, using the Milty on the record while it's playing, because I'd seen it on forums. So if you've been doing that for 40 years and you just see this video now, of course, seeing that result might kind of sting your pride a little bit. But that's the whole point of doing this testing. It's like to try and discover things to help us, maybe change our behavior slightly to give us a better result. But now watch this. I tested the Furatech Destat on the same record straight after. And amazingly, you can see how effective it is, because in real time, you can see it lowers the static on the playing record that's just been put there by the Milty down to 0 in real time. And it shows that yes, it is expensive, but it works better than anything else. And nothing in this world is perfect, but in terms of doing the job of, removing static, this seems better than anything else. It seems to be almost perfect. And, the fact you can use it on the record before you put it on the turntable, or you can actually use it while the turntable's spinning and reduce the static down, that shows how flexible this is as a product as well. So yes, it's expensive, but the results speak for themselves. But this whole situation, all this testing has made me question the problem. How big a problem is static charge on our records when you have a good turntable like the Origin Live that seems to be managing the static really very well. So that's, definitely opened my eyes to the whole situation. So I wanted to look at it a little bit more and do some more testing here. Because look at this situation where you take a claimed anti-static record brush like the Furatech Gold brush, and if you use it perfectly, you can see it also can reduce the static on the record down to 0, and shows why I think it's a cracker of a brush for £25 based on this and my findings under the microscope in the last video I made about record cleaning. But it's not all gravy here, because as you can see, it's very easy to use the Furatech brush on a different record or in a slightly different way, and the result is not as good. So I definitely wouldn't rely on a brush like the Furatech brush to completely kill the static on a record. But as you've seen, if you hold it correctly and get the technique just perfect, it can do it. So it creates an interesting situation there. But if something's technique reliant, I find that very difficult to fully trust. So, the results are there. You can make your own mind up. But what about those of you who wet clean your records in any of the many ways that you can? Some of you have written comments that claim to wet cleaning makes your records free of static. So I wanted to test that too. I have a Degritter Mark II ultrasonic record cleaner, and I tested a record for static during its wash phase. And you can see there is no static on the record while it's being washed. That is what I expected. I tested again during the rinse phase of the cleaning process. And again, while the record is wet, there is no static there. But now look at this. While the record is in the drying stage, the static rises really high to around 4 kilovolts. And that stays true or the same when you remove the record and hold it in your hands. So yes, wet cleaning can reduce static temporarily, but the drying process may well add static back again, especially if you are drying with any towels or anything like that. We've just cleaned the record and all our dust and debris is starting to stick to it straight away because the static charge is there. But that is where I see a real benefit to a product like either the Milty or the Furatech. It's after we've cleaned our record, we've dried it, maybe that static has gone up, we will never know unless we're testing. So if we reduce it or kill it with either of these products before we put it away in the sleeve, well then we've taken that potential increase in static problem away. So hopefully less dust and muck and debris ends up on our record. And I think that would be the same for before we play it or definitely after we play it. When that record's in our hands, that's when the static charge is going to be at its highest. If there's any dust and debris in the air, that's when it's going to find its way and stick to the record. So if we're using these types of products to take that static charge down or completely kill it, then we're keeping our records cleaner for longer. So hopefully we get less of that kind of build up of dust and muck on our stylus that we saw at the beginning of the video. But even if we do, we've got products that can clean the styluses as well. So that's all really fantastic. But either way, like looking at all this testing and everything that I've done here, for me, I'm still going to be using the Furatech Destat 3 in all the ways that I did before. I'm still using it before I put a record down to listening to it. And I'm also using it after, before I put it away in the sleeve. And sometimes between halves of the record as well, depending on how motivated I am. I'm still using my project brush to clean my stylus during listening sessions because it's just quick. If I see any visible build up of dust, I use the brush to gently just remove that before. But the Flux HiFi sonic cleaner takes a little bit more time. So for me, it's perfect for either at the beginning of a listening session or at the end of a listening session to give the cantilever and the tip a really nice, good quality clean. So that, either that session or the next session, we start off in a really great place. And of course, through the session, it might pick up a little bit of dust, but it's only so much we can do. You can clean it as much as you want, but it becomes a pain in the ass. Doing it once per session, I think, is about the perfect amount. So these are all good tools. They're all interesting tools. They all serve a purpose. They all do a job. And I think that's why we see so many different opinions out there from different vinyl enthusiasts. They all seem to find a solution that works for them, based on, I suppose, what it costs and the results they've had. And everything I've tested, you can see it all works. But it doesn't necessarily all work perfectly. It does seem like the more expensive products I have here do seem to give the best results, the closest to perfect results. So I feel like in that situation, the extra price could be justified. You could see that as justified. But I can see others thinking, well, that's good enough. The £20 putty or the brush for £10, the cleaning results you saw, it could be good enough for you. So you can see that you don't necessarily have to spend all this money to get good results. But if you do spend the extra to buy I'm going to use the word better products because the results are better from the more expensive products, when you can see hopefully they'll be justified. And the reason why I did any of this testing or all of this testing in the first place is because I wanted to know, didn't want to base my opinion on someone else. I wanted to test things myself properly so I knew without doubt, unequivocally, what is the best approach to take. For keeping a record clean, now for keeping a stylus clean, for keeping the static down. And I can use that for all of the vinyl product reviews that I'll be doing from here on in. So this has been a really useful thing for me to do. I've tried to share all of the results across 3 videos, static, under a microscope. I've tried to do everything I can. If you think there's anything I've missed, if you think you can recommend any products that could be better than these, please do so. And of course, I'll test them. But I really want to put all this cleaning, to bed, put it behind me, use what I've learned here to take my vinyl listening quality forwards, but really to use this for a review. So I've taken the best steps I can to test things properly to get the best results. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've learned something. I hope it's been useful. If you have enjoyed it, if you found it useful, hit the thumbs up. It really helps. And if you'd like to see lots more vinyl playback related videos, there's loads on the channel already, but if not, subscribe and I'll see you soon.